People who have been born into families who are part of a cult. What's your story? My parents were Scientologists, with my dad being a pretty high-ranking guy. He ran 2 major cities in the late 80s. They left when I was still young, but they used to harass our family a lot when I was growing up. Made me very distrustful of organized religion in general. Edit. My mom is now a super atheist, and my dad, even though he left 30 years ago, still believes in a lot of the tenets, especially the reincarnation part / thetans. He's just not active, and don't press it on me or anyone else in any way. Scientology is not a religion, it's a cult and a pyramid scheme. On the serious, I'll share my story, even though it wasn't me or my family directly, but looks like the serious responses are pretty thin in this thread so far. My closest friend in college, we'll call him C, moved to Cali after he graduated. We kinda lost touch after a year or so. A bit later on, I got a call from his mother out of the blue one day. She must have had to dig just to get my cell number, but she starts off and asks me if I've talked to C lately. I tell her no, it's almost been a year since I last chatted with him. She then goes on to tell me to please reach out to her if I'm able to get in touch with him in any way. He apparently got involved with some cult, sold all of his belongings, and disappeared without any contact with his previous life. They have a private detective in Cali right now searching for him. I don't hear from either of them again for a year after that. Time goes by, and one day I get a call from C one day. He moved to a new city, coincidentally a few hours from the new city I had moved to. He's weird on the phone though. Super outgoing, energetic dude, sounds like a zombie the first time I talk to him. I invite him to my city to spend a weekend to catch up. He actually drives down and stays for a 3-day weekend, and I don't recognize this dude at all. He seemed like equal parts zombie, depressed, anxious, relieved, all at the same time. It was an awkward weekend. The cult thing didn't get broached once. I was never 100% sold on the C joined the cult story, but without a single person hearing from him, it wasn't the worst possible scenario of all things, I guess. Having him sit in front of me that weekend, it firmed that theory up. So I didn't bring it up that weekend. Never have actually. Just tried to make him feel at home and throw some nostalgia his way, you know. It's been about a decade now. He's married and a dad now. He wrote a novel, kinda sci-fi fiction. It's about a dude who gets caught up in a cult. Then he transcends reality and time, and it kinda goes from there. Anyway, I ain't trying to write a book here, but thought I'd share just the short version of one of the craziest stories I've ever lived through. A distant family member of mine headed a new age cult that I got roped into when I left home and went to college close by. It started out as a group of friends of theirs that I became close to, cause they were the only family around, but then things escalated quickly. It went from love bombing, which I really needed, because my family had gone through a terrible divorce and family was never the same after that, to soon after becoming my one and only family. The cult's beliefs were that the love and the connections that we all had with one another were the hope for the future. And the family member who formed this cult was the original creator of everything, and then was supposed to turn everything over to us, the group whose love could take things over. Of course, the group always failed, and we were always in trouble, and in order to become right we would have to give away our money and time to very hard manual labor, until we were exhausted. We were so exhausted that anything you told us we would believe. Well, after a death in my immediate family, I stopped showing to the events and meetings of the cult that I normally would. I was given a break. During that break I reflected and realized I needed to get out. I lived on site with that family member, so it wasn't easy, and I was in limbo for a while, still doing manual labor, but not fully committed like I was before. I was working, and I met my current partner, who eventually realized what was going on and helped me out. We moved in together, and I have since cut 100% of my ties without ever giving any reason. I feel a lot of it was dealing with extreme narcissism from the leader, so that is really the best way to get out of that situation, to leave unannounced and abruptly. I know I'm late, and I don't know how much you want to know, but my grandparent was the leader of a smallish cult. It was very religious based, and the main focus was pedophilia and slavery. My name growing up was slave too, and my role was to do all the chores on the farm, all the housework and to please my master. I got out. My body has some pretty horrible scars, and I'm okay to talk about my past, though I've lost a lot of friends due to oversharing. I'm happy to answer most questions. Are you okay now? Well, I've moved on and flashbacks, night terrors and the like are few and far between. However, some days are far worse than others, particularly when I'm having a rather painful day, and then the memories of why I'm in pain become hard to ignore. Overall, I'd say I'm okay. How did you get out? When did you decide to leave? Did you have any failed attempts to leave? If so, what happened and what went wrong? Did you have help escaping? How old were you when you left? Are there people you know still trapped as slaves? If so, how can they be helped out now? What was the hardest part about your eventual escape? How old were you when you escaped? At what point did it finally sink in that you were out and safe from harm? Are you male or female? I'm asking extra questions because you said you are afraid of oversharing, but I would love to hear every single detail you're willing to share. Thanks. So glad you're out and doing well now. This is going to be a long story, but I'll add as much details as I can without it being ridiculously long. In high school, we had a health class of sorts, where we sat with a counselor and talked about ourselves, our normal daily routine. On the first day we had to write a list of all our nicknames, which is a fairly simple task, so I wrote down all my main nicknames. Since Slave 2, B***TCH, Dog, Rat and Stupid were the top 5, the counselor had more questions. The next day I explained what my life was like, and when I got to the part that my father had come into my room often, she stopped the session and took me immediately to the police. I told the police everything I could remember about my life. Being starved and assaulted made it harder to remember, but I tried. They told me I didn't have to go back, and I accepted their offer and never went back. I was 14. Growing up, people did notice, and I had made videos before through the police, legally documenting what was happening to me, the bruises and injuries, etc. However, when it all really mattered, my father blackmailed a doctor and got her to change medical records, from what I've been told, which wiped all the evidence I had. Apparently when police checked, my medical records were missing huge chunks, but they didn't know who did it. Due to the lack of evidence, my case sits as a cold case. They are just waiting for a plea of guilt, more evidence, or someone else to say something. My brother and I often planned to escape, since he didn't like the lack of food either, but while it was plausible that I could have run off the property, the cult has their fingers in a much larger community, so anyone driving past would have picked us up and taken us back, and based on the punishments I received for being 1 second too slow to answer something, the thought of the punishments I'd receive for trying to run away kept me on the property. There are still people trapped there. After my brother and I left, my father just had more kids, so my half siblings are there. From what I've heard, the eldest one almost died from turning septic due to neglect, and his new wife's parents moved in to help raise them after that, so I hope they are fed more, but I know they'll have pretty bad lives. I feel sorry that I can't do much about it, but at the same time my father's health is declining, so I hope something happens that stops the cycle of abuse. The hardest part of escaping was living in constant fear of being taken back, but when you live in such a situation for so long, you develop a sixth sense as to when bad people like him are around, which saved me from him plenty. For example, he turned up at the high school and tried to kidnap us, but my gut feeling hit before he got there, so I managed to remove myself and my brother from the situation. I found out later that he almost punched a pregnant teacher and the principal, and eventually was removed from the premises. I finally realized I was safe from harm when I shifted into my own place in a completely different part of the country with my partner. Many years later, it finally clicked that he didn't know I was here. None of the cult could reach me, and I was safe. However, part of him is still in my mind, in the flashbacks and the grief. I lost a child he fathered, and so that brings up a whole can of worms. When people ask if I want kids or have kids, part of him will always be with me, and I'm still dealing with that. I might get hate for my gender, but I'm a trans man. I'm not trans because of what happened to me, even though a lot of accepting members of my family think that. I've known I was a male before I recognized what was happening to me was wrong. Again, I'm happy to answer anything. You say was so this cult hopefully got busted. It didn't really get busted as in blazing guns and stormed by the police, but it more fizzled out once my brother and I left, since there were no more of age slaves to do the work. My step siblings are there, however they are very young, and my father and grandparents are very old and ill, so the whole thing should die out in the near future. How many people were in the cult while you were there, if you don't mind me asking? Your grandparent and father seem to be the leaders, if I'm not mistaken. Was it a family cult, or were there other members? My grandparent was the main leader. Her son was second in command. It was made up of mixture of family and my grandparents' friends. The idea of the cult was to be a safe haven for pedophiles, while spreading their version of Christianity. I think in its height of operation, it was some 250 or so members. However, my father didn't like sharing, so it never really grew, and they couldn't get more underage women to join, because most underage women didn't like the idea of being used like that. The whole thing started falling apart when my brother and I left. There's now about 8 people there. I actually have a legit answer. My mom's parents joined a church when they moved to Columbus, Ohio like 50 years ago, not knowing they were a cult. By the time they realized it, it was too late, and they condemned the entire family to this fate. They were too afraid to leave, because all their friends were a part of this cult now. As a result, my mom and her siblings were raised in this cult, which my mom still won't tell me all the details. My mom was adopted and never swore in. The moment she turned 18, she joined the army and hit the road. Her siblings, however, are still involved, hitting 50 plus years now, and they raised their children in the cult as well. My mom was excommunicated, and thus I was never exposed to the abuse and horrors of the cult. My cousin, a wonderful human being, thought that my mom and her family, me included, were terrible human beings because we were excommunicated. After my cousin had been excommunicated, she reached out. Now we are very close, largely because neither of us have any extended family due to this cult, and surprise, she learned that we are actually pretty great. She shared with me some of her horrors while in the cult. Here's a few. She was sexually assaulted by her brother for years. When her other brother found out, he broke the first brother's leg while he was in the act. The parents only grounded him for a month and told my cousin that she is impure now and can no longer wear white at her wedding, and treated her as if the assault was her fault. The pastor threatened her life if she sought external help for the assault. The cult demanded that you attend 4 times a week. Classic cult behavior. I wrote a paper on cults for a college course. This is so they can keep tabs on you to keep you in line. The cult demanded payment as donation, but was essentially a subscription. Otherwise you were excommunicated. We are talking hundreds of dollars a month. Her family, father, and siblings will not talk to her. Her mother sometimes reaches out to say sorry and provide bullshit excuses to make herself seem like the good guy. Really should have used a serious tag. I was born into a pretty big cult. Been out for 4 years, but the damage never really goes away. It leaves you without a family, without any ability to make or maintain friendships, and with an almost paralyzing distrust of anyone and anything religious. I would argue that the last one isn't entirely undeserved, but it's gotten in the way of a few conversations before. Got years of counseling and therapy ahead of me to unpick the mess they made of me.